All right. I think we're rolling. So, one, thank you for being here. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to come up and talk about something I know virtually nothing about. So before we really jump into it, Mr. Derek Vance is with us. Give us kind of just a quick overview, background, or where you came from.
Yeah. Again, name's Derek Vance. Born and raised Chickasaw County, Mississippi, which is North Mississippi. Graduated high school there, 2000, Mississippi State. Went on to work in the oil and gas industry. Ended up in commercial banking, and now my wife and little girl, we live here in Madison.
Yeah. But you're known around, or your thing around here, and why we brought you on here today is because you have a what's the word, a high affection for trapping.
Yes, actually I do, and I really have a passion about it because of wildlife management, conservation.
Right.
I've really seen a difference, especially on the farms that I've trapped.
Right.
When actually you come in, implement a predator removal program paired with effective and habitat management, and then you have a recipe for success.
Right. It's interesting to me when you talk about trapping is like I feel like in past recent years trapping has become like, I mean, it's never been like gone, but all of a sudden it's become popular again. It's become more popular. People are talking about it more.
Yeah.
And what's it is like I think what is not necessarily either forgotten by a lot of people was how long trapping has actually been around.
Yeah. I mean, in some of the research I've done,
Right.
Obviously trapping has been around for ages, even back to the Neolithic age. I mean, snares, deadfalls, pitfalls, all those were utilized by early Americans, primarily because they wish to have warmth through the utilization of the fur.
Right.
And then it's really amazing kind of how it's even though it's become a modern in a sense of a sport, how many aspects of trapping have remained the same over hundreds of years.
Yeah.
So.
Most of the research that I did said even like trapping was occurring even before like recorded history as we know it.
Yeah.
It's always kind of been an ongoing thing.
But that is correct.
What's interesting to me is how like the different motives behind trapping.
Yeah.
You know, like you said, from necessity to up and around. I think it was like around like the 1800s, it was the fur trade.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you really look back at history, even looking, early 1500s, the French actually came to what is now, present day Canada, began to trade, pots, pans, different articles for fur, which the primarily pelt of choice was obviously beaver. And then from the early 1600s, the beaver pelts were really in high demand because of demand overseas, and we see that the first traps begin to be manufactured then. And what's interesting about the early 1600s up to the 1800s when they were first mass-produced traps, you see as many, and I've heard as many as 115, 120 different trap makers, and a lot of those were even undocumented, even above and beyond that. You had the basic concept of a trap made by a blacksmith, all over the known world, and different frontiersmen and explorers were utilizing those traps. Yeah. So really interesting.
It is interesting, and to see like now. I mean, I guess they're like now you see such a big part of it in today's age. What wasn't back then when people were trapping, the whole idea of it being for the point of conservation or wildlife, for betterment of now people do it to improve their deer and their turkey populations.
Yeah.
You know, that wasn't the motive at all back then.
Yeah,
that's interesting to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And just I guess what I find interesting is that as you know the settlers came into North America, you know, your primary motivation for settlement was, you know, really the fur trade in some aspects of the word. You know, the Hudson Bay Company, the Northwest Company. You know, you had the French and Indian War. You had what they referred to as the Beaver Wars. All of that, you know, occurred and happened because, you know, the different, you know, the French, the British, the English were vying for trapping rights.
Right.
And you know what's really unique is that even, you know, like the Hudson Bay Company, you know, that's a company that's even in existence today,
right.
Which is pretty phenomenal that has survived over centuries.
Yeah.
You know, fur trade began to decline in the 1700s, and then, you know, after that, the first, you know, mass-produced traps began in, you know, the 1800s by a man by the name of Sewell Newhouse, which that design has even survived to even this day. And that's what's so unique about it is that you know, especially the long spring trap, of which they still sell mass produced today. I even own quite a few dozen myself.
Right.
Those are literally there's nothing that really has changed about the design of that trap.
That's interesting.
That's
pretty cool too, because it's, you know, that if that's not standing the test of time, I don't know what is. That it's been around that long.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So tell me, how you got into trapping yourself.
Yeah. I actually have my grandfather to probably blame on my trapping addiction. We actually own a farm in North Mississippi.
Okay.
My grandfather had a dear friend that actually would come up from Philadelphia, Mississippi. Every fall, he would trap our farm and surrounding properties. His name was Ronald, and we refer to him as Preacher Ratley. And when Preacher would come up, you know, he would take 10 or so coyotes off of our farm, and he really enjoyed it. He had a passion about it. And one day my grandfather mentioned to me, I was a sophomore in high school. He mentioned to me, he said, "Hey Derek, Preacher will be coming up this weekend to do a little coyote trapping. Would you be interested in tagging along with him?" And of course, sophomore in high school, I was looking for an excuse to leave school early, so I left early one day and actually accompanied him on a trap line, and really took an interest in it. We were primarily focusing on snares that weekend.
Okay.
We set several dozen on our farm, and once he had kind of shown me what we were looking for as far as like a coyote trail, I said, "Preacher, you know, I know there's a lot of these trails behind, you know, there's an old dairy farm behind our house,
right.
And there's a ton of these trails, you know, crisscrossing back and forth over the roads." And his eyes kind of lit up. He said, "Let's go take a look at it." So we called the landowner to make sure we had permission.
Right.
Got out there, and we really had a huge coyote population there. We set a couple dozen snares down this particular ditch, and I'll never forget it. The next morning, when we ran the trap line, when we turned off the main road, the first snare off of the road, within a couple hundred yards of the road there, we had a coyote bouncing in it.
Yeah.
And I can literally tell you from that very second, I was hooked.
It had you.
And we had that first morning, which is still actually probably or it is a record on my trap lines. We actually got, I think it was 7 out that morning, which was pretty phenomenal.
Yeah.
I've had a couple of mornings where I've caught 5, 6, but never 7.
Well, especially and this is something we can get into later, but just how crafty a coyote actually is to have 7 on one line. That's pretty strong.
Yeah. And again, this farm hadn't been trapped. It was an overpopulation of coyotes.
Right.
Lots of small game there, which the population could support. So you had a large population there, and it was pretty phenomenal.
Yeah,
so,
there's just nothing keeping them in check until y'all came along.
Nothing in check. But from that day on, they were pretty much, even to this day, they're still in check there.
Right. Yeah, because like you said, I was surprised. I imagine you didn't take your foot off the gas as far as that goes.
No, absolutely not. And ever since then, I really had I really respect, how Preacher actually mentored me in that, those first several years, I strictly focused on snaring and snaring alone. And with doing that, you actually have to learn the animal to a certain degree that you actually have to put that snare right in the middle of his way of travel. And I think focusing on that probably the first 5 years. I was thinking about this morning. It was about 5 years that I focused strictly on snaring. That made me be a better foot trapper later on down the road, because it forced me to put myself in the position of that coyote. And that's really how you have to focus on the sport when you get into it, and how you approach the sets.
Right.
Yeah.
So snaring, like I said, my knowledge is very, very slim. How much difference does it make, like with your setups, between the snaring and foot trapping?
Yeah. Well, when it comes to snaring, you basically have to, you have to physically see a trail or have an area in which they travel, and you can actually see their path of travel to place that snare. You just can't blindly set a snare out in the middle of a field and come back the next morning and have a coyote.
Just hope for the best,
right?
Okay.
Correct. And that actually differs from foot trapping, in that I can place that foot trap in and around what we would consider a coyote sign, which is, track, scat, different pieces of sign that we see as trappers, and we can actually lure that coyote in to a certain extent with, either commercial or homemade, lures and baits, and then from that, they place their foot on a pan, and they're captured.
Right.
But it's I use a mixed bag. So when I approach a farm or a place to trap, I will actually set both, which makes a more effective trap line.
Yeah. So snaring sounds to me. Tell me if I'm right or wrong. Snaring sounds like it's more of a lot more of a finesse game.
It is. Well, I would say both, but snaring is definitely you have to be focused in on their path of travel.
Right.
So
interesting. How long, like if you had to guess, like how long did it take you doing that before you were like, okay, I kind of maybe got the hang of this a little bit? Because that's, I mean, just hearing you talk about it, like that sounds like a pretty healthy task to take on.
Yeah.
Figuring that out.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, in all honesty, and any trapper that's being honest with you will tell you that anytime we go out on a trap line, we are learning. If an animal does not teach you something, when you go out on a trap line, you might as well hang it up. I mean, as what I would consider as proficient as I've gotten over the years, and either snaring or foot trapping, that animal is always teaching you something. I'll give you an example. I had a farm I trapped in northern Madison County last fall, and I was very successful the first few days. I think I caught 6 or 7 coyotes over the first few days. Mm-hmm. And then I had one particular field in which I had some foot traps, and every one of my foot traps were being dug up, which let me know that either it was a really smart coyote that had been trapped before he had been pinched, on the toe before, or my traps had some kind of scent on them, of which my other traps were connecting, so I knew that possibly wasn't the case. So I backed up, looked at the situation. There was one 4-wheeler trail coming in that the main field, which had a 4-track, one, two lanes of which they could go in and out or use either or.
Right.
And so since I determined I had a quote unquote digger on my hands, I just hung 2 snares and both sides of the 4-wheeler trail. The next morning, had a huge male coyote, and from that moment on, the digging in that field stopped. And so obviously I caught the culprit.
Right.
So you have to be versatile, in what you do.
Yeah.
And you have to learn from the animals. If you bed a trap, you notice the animals are stepping, 3 inches in front of the trap and an inch to the right, you learn, hey, I should adjust that pan accordingly for him to be able to put his foot directly on that pan. Yeah. So you really have to be open-minded about it.
Yeah.
You really do. So
how, so is it, I had no idea it was that much of a fine science. Have you really gone in and adjusted it by that few of inches, and then it results in catching a coyote?
Yes, absolutely. And
that's crazy.
Yeah, and so you, as you build your trap line, as you run your traps, a lot of times you're, a mentor or someone who's trapped, a number of years will tell you that you learn more from not catching an animal that you do catching an animal. And with that being said, when I run my trap line in the morning, I'm not just, obviously complying with, the state of Mississippi, trapping regulations and laws. Right. I'm actually looking to see, did I have a coyote approach my set? If he did, why didn't he come closer? Was it my bait? Was it my lure? Did he see something that he didn't like? Or was my trap just in the wrong place? He liked everything. But why didn't he stay there longer? Why was my trap, to the left an inch? Yeah. It should have been, maybe over further a little bit.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting.
That sounds interesting. Yeah. Like I had no clue it was that fine tuned about it. That's
yeah, absolutely.
So like when you go to baiting these sites, like what kind of stuff are you using?
Yeah, so obviously to the listeners, whatever state you're in, you need to check into your your trapping laws, your whatever bait lure. Most of those are regulated. I actually use lure and bait, and a lot of times a urine, a predator urine there at all of my sets, and the bait that I actually place is just a small amount. It's normally a commercial made bait by one of our a lure maker that I trust, and that I know their stuff actually works.
Right.
And how I do that, I keep records. I keep very detailed records on every set. Every set I put out, every bait I use, every lure I use, and what you'll find is I'll find a lure bait combination that just really shines.
Yeah.
And so, but with that being said, on one farm it may shine, but you may move 30 miles down the road at another farm, and that bait lure combination doesn't work quite as well.
Yeah.
So it's according. Obviously, there's 3 types of sets, and a dirt hole set, a flat set, and a blind set. The dirt hole really simulates that an animal has buried something.
Okay.
And since coyotes and many predators are opportunistic, they will come and investigate that. And just with a minute amount of bait and lure in that hole, that draws them, it holds them enough to place their feet around enough to get caught.
To get trapped.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Kind of, if you don't mind, like those different types of sets that you just like, can you kind of describe those a little bit more?
Yeah. So a flat, a dirt hole set is probably the most widely used.
Okay.
It is where you will actually find obviously you want to set on location, so you want tracks or scat or some type of sign. Hair on the bottom of a fence, a fence or something like that, to know a coyote has been there.
Right.
You can use, I actually use a commercial made, a small auger, a 3-inch auger.
Okay.
And I would drill a hole about at a 45-degree angle. And again, that depends on where you put it. If you put it in the side of a bank, if If you put it, in the flat ground, I will adjust it accordingly. And then you drill it, 8, 9, 10 inches deep. Sometimes I'll go deeper, and then that creates the illusion that something has buried something there.
Right.
And then I will place my bait in the hole at the bottom, the lure at the bottom. A lot of times I'll take a little ball of sheep's wool and I'll put down the hole to kind of cover the bait up. Uh-huh. And then I will bed my foot trap out in front of that hole in the dirt pattern that I actually dug, the way the dirt's sprayed out.
Right.
I will bed my traps somewhere in that dirt pattern according to how I think he will approach.
Okay.
And then that simulates that, something has dug up, and buried something.
Yeah.
And they'll normally come in to investigate. Normally they'll always circle. Of which then you can place another set outside of that circle and be just as effective.
Yeah.
And then, of course, in addition to bait and lure, a lot of times I'll put some type of urine, whether it be coyote urine, fox urine. Is usually pretty effective. So that's the flat set. The dirt hole set. The flat set is anything that doesn't technically have a hole punched in the earth. Okay. So it can be a tuft of grass. It can be an empty turtle shell. It can be an old bone. Mm-hmm. It can be a number of different objects. I've known trappers to use, the edge of an old plow on, setting out off the edge of a field.
Right.
And you place bait, lure on that object, and it is a completely, again, what we call a flat set. And then you have to be more careful with a flat set because you have to blend your trap in the earth, underneath the earth, and it has to look exactly as you approach the set before you started digging a trap bed.
Right.
And so that constitutes a flat set.
Yeah. So you want to leave it like nothing was ever there.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. A good flat set, you could come with me on my trap line and we drive by my flat set and me know the trap was there, but you would never know it was there. Yeah. Or me, if it was really good.
Is that attributed to just how attentive coyotes are? Like, they just tune into that stuff that easy?
Yes. So you have to think of it like this, and I've had a trapper describe it, and I think it's great. It would be the equivalent of you and I walking in our house that we walk into every day,
right?
And there's a huge pizza box open in the middle of the living room, and there's pizza strewn everywhere. The cushions on the couch, are messed up. Your TV's on. Something is not right. It's different. You got to think that coyote, he is there 24/7. That is his territory, generally most of the time. And when you present a food or a piece of bait or something that is normally not there, his senses go on high alert.
Right.
And from that point on, he's on extreme high alert. So you have to be very, and that just plays in with their overall demeanor.
Right.
As well.
Right.
So.
That's interesting. We kind of, what's interesting about that is that kind of translates over. We kind of apply some of the same principles to when we're hanging stands for deer.
Yeah.
I've actually heard Troy make the same analogy, because he's like, man, we walked out, the deer picked me out, my tree stand out immediately. And Troy used the same. You walk in your house and someone moved all your furniture around. Yeah. That's where the deer live. So I can relate to that. But it's just an even, you haven't even gone through all the sets yet, but it's just crazy to me how much well-tuned this is. I had no clue.
Oh, yeah. It's definitely a science.
Yeah.
It's definitely
so I'm just imagining, like, have there been an instance like on the on a dirt hole set where, like you've seen where they do the circling thing and he missed your trap by a few inches, you go and adjust it and then you catch the coyote?
Yeah. Or in that scenario, what I would do, or any trapper that's paying attention would do, if you have and again, it goes back to the type of coyote. So if you had a young coyote that had just been dispersed from his basically his territory, right, and he was searching for a new territory, he was hungry, he or she was hungry, they were looking, and there's a dirt hole with bait at the bottom of it, they may come straight in, whereas an adult coyote would circle and circle and circle and may really never get comfortable with it. So what myself or any trapper that would observe that would do would be to back off 10, 15 feet away and put in a flat set with a different bait, lure, or maybe just maybe a spot of urine on a grass clump. And a lot of times coyotes, when they come in and they can't figure it out, they're putting almost 100% trust in their nose.
Right.
And so as they circle and they're trying to win that and they're trying to figure out what's going on, then they come across your other set of which there's no dirt pattern. Yeah. It's just a scent of a different coyote. Well, then they go over to, put their scent on top of that scent, and then they get caught on a flat set.
Yeah. So a lot more times they're more comfortable with the flat set if they're wily to a degree. Not to wily is kind of a point.
Yes, I would say that, and different trappers have different take on, percentages. I'm pretty much I'm normally a 90%, 95% flat set guy, 5%, 10% dirt hole, guy. So as you, and that just comes with time and trapping, you just learn what sets work for you.
Right.
And out of the dirt hole, the flat, or the blind set, it's really important for new trappers, and I can speak to that a little later, to master a set.
Right.
Because if you master a set and you're catching coyotes, you're doing something right.
Right.
And just repeat that set. No matter what anybody tells you, repeat that set. Repeat it until a coyote tells you different.
Right.
So.
Right. Gotcha. Yeah. And I cut you off a little bit before you really got to the blind set, describing what that was.
Yeah. So a blind set, think of it as a snare in the ground.
Okay.
So you're actually finding a path of travel that a coyote is going down, and you actually bed your trap in the center of that path of travel. It's almost like an inconspicuous flat set. It's a flat set with no bait, lure, or urine.
Okay.
And so some people refer to it as a mafia set. You're just you're walking along, and then out of the blue it happens.
Gotcha.
And I use that a lot on educated coyotes or coyotes. Going back to the story where I caught the digger coming into the field, I could have actually bedded a trap in one of those tracks, those four-wheeler tracks, and probably caught the coyote just as effective as I could have with the snare.
Right.
So, yeah. So
interesting.
So a dirt hole, a flat, and a blind set. So,
got you. Mm-hmm. Interesting. That really is so. Like I had no idea. Yeah, no idea. What is that one right there? The one you brought with you. What is?
Okay, so this is just a number 3 offset, what we call a fully modified bridger.
Okay.
A foot trap, and this trap, is primarily used for coyotes, bobcats. To me, it's the more of the perfect size. Again, you ask 100 trappers, you're going to get 100 different answers on their equipment. But I prefer this on my trap line. It's just I've learned to utilize it. It is 4-coiled, so that means that it's a lot faster coming out of the ground. You really can get into a whole nother discussion on how to modify traps because a lot of people have no idea that pan tension is one of the biggest factors in whether or not you get a good catch or not.
Right.
Most people think that traps pan should free fall when it actually shouldn't. It should be coyotes. You're looking at 3+ pounds of pan tension, and each of my traps are modified and are checked for that.
Right.
So,
yeah. So will you, like, if you have it on the wrong tension, I imagine you could lose coyotes at some point.
Yeah, it's really physics. I give the example to newer trappers as if you're standing upright and you drop something. Say it's your car keys. So if you drop something and you realize immediately you've dropped it, you can reach down and catch it and hardly bend at the waist at all. If you drop something and you don't realize it's falling until it's hitting the ground, you have to bend all the way over, and then you have to have that reverse action coming up. So think about it in a trap. If you have a light pan tension and you start down and the trap fires, you can pull your paw or your hand or whatever back very quickly.
Oh yeah, okay.
But if it breaks and falls on through, you have a whole lot less of a chance to get your paw or hand or whatever fully back out before it gets you. And with a 3-4 pound plus tension, you're getting a full pad catch, which is what trappers are looking for.
Right. How often do you have to modify the traps you get? Do the ones you get, they're usually good out the gate, or do you have to do some tinkering to them?
Most all traps out of the box are going to need some type of modification. There are some on the market that are pretty consistent. Right. I spend maybe 5 minutes a trap when I first pull them out of the box and modifying them, and then obviously as you use your traps over the years, you know which traps need a little extra TLC than some of them that don't, and I'm able to, even in the field pan tension. I have tools to adjust that in my bag, my set bag, to be able to do that in the field.
Yeah, is that pretty common practice among trappers?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So it's not okay. So it's not that difficult to do.
No. You just learn the basic concept of trap modification, and again, some traps need more than others. But you kind of learn your trap. That's why I've stuck with the same trap for years.
Yeah, for sure. So what's interesting to me, to kind of change the subject a little bit, is we talked kind of about the motive behind trapping, and you kind of alluded a little bit to how much ground you actually trap now. Yeah. But it's that, how much ground do you trap?
I mean, of course, I do have a full-time job as a commercial banker. So during the winter time, from say September to late January, I'm getting up at 4:00 every morning. Yeah. And I'm on the four-wheeler on the trap line by 4:30. Running traps. I try to keep my trap lines closer to home. I would say that an average farm that I trap is going to be anywhere from 500 to 1,000 acres.
Gotcha.
And the number of traps I put out and then have to check, every morning is that's contingent upon the sign.
Right.
I can actually go on a farm and usually within riding that farm over, I can tell you within a few at least 30 minutes to an hour, or maybe a couple hours, over how long it takes me to cover the farm, how many coyotes you have,
really?
And how much effort I'm going to have to put into it.
And that's just going off a sign.
Yeah, just sign. And what's really interesting as well, and that your question prompted this thought is, I've trapped farms year after year, and what we will find as trappers is that at certain intersections, certain wood lines, certain bends in the road, certain creek crossings, we will catch coyotes there year after year. And it's almost inevitable when I go back to that farm that I would place a trap within probably a few feet of where I placed one the year before.
Right.
And I will connect there almost every year.
Yeah. See, that's interesting, because there's actually there's a friend of ours named Johnny Hamilton, and he's one of the best. He's known for out west for being a lion hunter. Yeah, with dogs, and we had him on the podcast last September because he's also an elk guy. We talked some elk, and we talked about mountain lions, because we actually what prompted that is the spring before we were turkey hunting in New Mexico, and we saw a mountain lion, just like we were getting out of our tents and getting dressed to go turkey hunting, and a mountain lion just comes walking through, and we were talking to Johnny some about mountain lion behavior, and what's interesting about what you just said is he was he kind of said the same thing in reference to the lions. He said there's some spots that just, like I said, they're historical. And especially if he's running, if he's hunted the same property, and he said sometimes he can just recognize it. Right. And what was interesting is when he told us that, and I hadn't told him this yet, is so we described to the land manager out there at the farm where we saw the mountain lion, we described exactly where he saw it, and he said, he said 20 so odd years ago, we brought a lion hunter out here, and we were driving him, and he said they were driving through, because it was right on one of the little, like a little, 2-track road.
Yeah.
He said we were driving through right here, and he said the old lion guy goes, "This is line crossing." He's just right here. He said lion will cross right here.
Yeah.
And he said he said there's been just something about it that makes them, about their behavior, that makes them want to cross right there. So it's interesting that coyotes are kind of along the same behavior.
Yeah, and I've noticed, in my years of trapping, and obviously, I've trapped 22 of my 37 years, but I've noticed that trapping has made me become a more cognitive, deer hunter, turkey hunter. Turkey hunting is my passion outside of trapping, and it has made me more observant in the field of what's going on. Why are the animals coming out of this draw?
Right.
Why are they skirting this edge? Why are they doing this? Why are they doing that? It's made me a very cognitive outdoorsman.
Yeah, I would imagine so. Like, is it just hearing you talking about snaring? I'm like, that's some intuitive work, figuring out where they're traveling. Like
I had a farm. Actually, it was the same farm that I caught the what I'm referring to as the digger coyote on.
Right.
And when I rode over this farm, it was a big farm on the Big Black River.
Right.
And I noticed there was a large ag field off from the main river, and there was actually a point that came out in the woods. Well, I immediately went over as a trapper to observe that point, because I know predators will come out on that point and look over the field for possible prey or an opportunity for a free meal. And as soon as I got to the point, there was coyote sign everywhere, scat, So I got to looking, and down two of the ag, the hip rows there, I set 2 snares. And the next morning I connected immediately with one coyote, a big male who was an older coyote. I knew I caught one of the older coyotes there, probably.
Right.
And then the next morning I connected with another one there. And because I had spent my 2 snares there, I just backed off on the point and put a foot trap. I think it was a blended flat set. And I just put a bait and lure that was, that I had been successful with on the other side of the farm, and connected with a third one there. So it was, and then when I go back this fall, I'll probably be going back, I think the week of Thanksgiving, I will set that same point almost exactly where I set it last year.
Yeah.
So.
Because it makes sense. It's so interesting though, that they're that much of a creature of habit, but at the same time still as crafty as they can be. Yeah. So another thing is like the mindset of these like the landowners that are asking you to come and trap.
Yeah.
It's not like you're not having to ask. You're not knocking on doors. Hey, can I trap? You're having people call you. Hey, will you come trap? And that's just attributed to. I don't think people know how much damage a coyote can actually do. Yeah,
and the coyotes and you and I were discussing earlier. Coyotes are so hated, and you have to ask yourself why. Why are they a hated predator? Yeah. They're obviously national attention in the news even today. Yeah. They're coming in suburbs and snatching people's dogs and cats and. It really comes down to, I think the reason that they're so disliked is that a coyote has this very keen ability to adapt in any kind of environment they're in. They're obviously scavengers. They to a point. Any free meal, they're there for it. They're very opportunistic. Mm-hmm. They have a survival instinct like no other. Right. They walk around and coyote guys will tell you, especially coyote trappers will tell you, coyotes are literally phobic in everything they do. The way they approach anything new, they walk around phobic. They hunt phobic. They travel phobic. They breed other coyotes. They're very phobic, and that's what that's what's given them the ability to adapt. They're very territorial. I've noticed that when you start to take coyotes out, within a few years, new coyotes will filter in.
Right.
And kind of looking at the history of kind of how they got here.
Yeah.
Coyotes have been, predominantly known to be in the West for, hundreds of years. And interesting enough, I can remember my grandfather, my dad telling me that coyotes, really never made their way into North Mississippi until like the late 70s, early 80s.
Really?
And we actually had an abundance of fox, red and gray fox in North Mississippi. And as coyotes filtered in, they began to overtake, I guess you could say the food chain in that.
Just outcompeted them.
Right, they did. Trappers will find, fox that are bit or killed by coyotes, and establishing their territories, and
right.
they've moved in, and it's. And I've had the question before of how many coyotes do I have on my farm, and I will just from assessing it, looking, I will just say, well, I think you may only have 3 or 4 here, and sometimes that's a shock to them, sometimes it's not. A lot of times people hear the coyotes howling at night, and they're like, well, I've got 15 or 20 on my farm, and I said, well, actually in all reality you probably only have 3 or 4 that were in that pack, and I've actually observed that from a deer stand, which is pretty neat. But just their ability to survive and adapt is pretty phenomenal.
I was doing just a little bit of research in preparation for this podcast, and watching. I watched a video on their expansion, and kind of like where they started from, where they expanded to, where the fact that they're still expanding.
Oh, they are.
Yeah, there's some studies now they think they're going like down into like Central America.
You're absolutely correct, and I just, in preparation for the podcast, I brushed up on my knowledge of their expansion, and I actually saw that as well. Looks like they're kind of moving, Mexico on into Central America, and they're really not going to stop until, if they can figure out a way to swim, they're going to be even further than that.
Yeah, so. And that, another thing, and like one thing I always like to look into is like factors, like what made them be as prolific as they are. Because like I said, they're everywhere now. Yeah. And 2 of the biggest theories was one from like habitat fragmentation, from all the agriculture now, and agriculture, and then like fragmentation, deforestation is what makes them thrive. Yeah. Which makes sense, like I said, because that's everywhere now. There's not many big contiguous pieces of timber anymore. It's a lot, even down here, we have more than like the Midwest, but still there's a lot of fragmented, and they say that's part of what makes them thrive. Yeah.
And to that point, you can have let's say a block of timber that has been cut, it goes into a cutover stage, a phase, should I say, before while reforestation is taking place. During that time, you have undergrowth that comes up and becomes more of a should I say, a breeding ground for small mammals, rodents, birds, which is another form, that's another target, prey of theirs. So you now have you have an ecosystem almost created, that has created a buffet for them, should I say. Yeah. And then all of a sudden you see, and that's why I primarily, I'll even focus on ditch lines and stuff like that, because I know that they're, rabbits and small rodents and things that will attract predators. Therefore, that's where I focus my attention on to catch them.
Right. So let me ask you this. So you go to a spot that you haven't trapped before, and you implement a trapping program on it. What kind of response do you see in terms of like population changes in different animals, and how fast do you typically see it? Yeah.
Well, normally I'm focusing on removing coyotes from say September to January, February. Right. So and another interesting thing is that in the southeast or in Mississippi where we're located, pup dispersal occurs September, October-ish. So what I'm immediately doing is picking up the younger coyotes first, which are I like to refer to them as the teenagers that are running around with their first set of car keys. You can pick them up quite fast,
right,
and simple, because they're just not that, they're smart, but they're not to that point yet. As you go later in the year, I focus, I focus on picking up the adults and the smarter coyotes, and then you get on deep in wintertime, and then when the breeding season starts, it gets really hard to catch coyotes for a couple of weeks.
Okay.
It may spike again, but back to your question, I would say that the first year you're removing all of the young ones, a majority of the adults, which I find just on the farms that I trap, is the next spring you begin to have, a greater amount of fawns. You have, and we can get into nest predators, and speak to that. But your turkeys begin to, thrive a little bit more that next spring. They have more of a chance.
Right.
And then I would say by the second year of a really intense predator management program, you're starting to see results.
Right.
I've actually had. I trapped a farm in North Madison County, another farm that was in the high fence, and they began to see a change in population almost the first year after removing coyotes.
I can believe it. One of the more specific reasons I asked that is a place that a friend of ours ranch that we hunt in New Mexico. Mm-hmm. They implemented a trapping program out there, and it's a big ranch.
Yeah.
And they did it mostly because they like antelope hunting.
Yeah,
and they had some, they said someone told them, if you put in a strict trapping program, mm-hmm. you'll see, because their fawn recruitment, I think they did a study, their fawn recruitment was I want to say somewhere around 20%, mm-hmm. Bad. Yeah. And when we came back there, the next fall, the next spring, mm-hmm. we were seeing young antelope everywhere.
Oh yeah.
And now we saw more small game than we had ever seen. Mm-hmm. And it was it was night and day difference.
Yeah.
It was wild how much more wildlife was on that place. And then I think they did a recent study, I want to say somewhere around 80% in the fawn recruitment. Yeah. And I was like, that's nuts.
Yeah. So
absolutely nuts.
20 to 80. Yeah. And you can look at the studies that are done over the years. I've looked into that myself to see, okay, how effective, is my hobby, how effective,
right.
Something that I love to do. And, there's a number of different studies out there. I know in 2015, University of Georgia did a study partnering with the Warnell School of Forestry there. Coyotes, they accounted for about 53% of predation rate on fawns, while bobcats were only right around 10%. Another 2013 study in Alabama, they showed that they were responsible for somewhere around 66% of fawn predation, while bobcats were only 11.
Yeah.
And then another really interesting study that happened in 2013 in South Carolina was that this study took two control areas. They had one that they studied with trapping, and one they studied without. And I think this kind of shows the effectiveness. The one without trapping showed a predation rate of 77% predation rates by coyotes on fawns versus a 32% in the area that had trapping. So you're going from a 77 down to a 32%.
Yeah.
Studies out there, range from 30% up to, I've seen some as high as 70.
Right.
So even if you take the middle ground and you look at 50%, meet in the middle.
Yeah, that's still substantial.
That's one out of every two fawns that hit the ground within the first 3 to 4 weeks of their life are killed by coyotes. And you have different controversial studies that say, well, you need to take coyotes out in the spring versus the fall. You need to take them out in the fall versus the spring. But when it really comes down to it, if you're removing those predators off of that piece of property, you're gonna have greater.
You're gonna have results.
Yeah, you
right.
are.
Yeah, yeah. So no wonder. I mean, you look at facts like that. No wonder these people are calling you, asking you to trap their place.
Yeah,
if it makes that much of a difference.
Yeah. And even kind of an overlooked group of animals, should I say, that I encourage every landowner to look at would be their nest predators. I know there's studies out there that show that 40 to 60% of turkey nests are destroyed by what we refer to as nest predators,
right.
which are raccoons, opossums, skunks. And then those that actually do hatch then, have to face, hawks, owls.
Yeah, they got a lot of enemies.
Right, and then they become targets of bobcats, which is one of your bigger predators on poults and young turkeys, and then adult turkeys in general. But if a lot of times when I come on a farm, I will try to educate the landowner to assist me or to help me take out the nest predators when I'm not there. And if I take out the coyotes and the bobcats and they take out the nest predators while I'm not on site, through their own efforts, you've really double dipped in predator management. And this landowners see results.
Yeah. I had a biologist tell me that, he said pretty much if you're going to see an effect as far as like a real effect with as far as turkeys or whatever go, you have to get kind of that level of serious with it like you're talking about.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't just, he said you can do it. I mean, it's definitely not going to hurt, but if you want to see real results, you kind of have to hit it as hard as you're talking about hitting it.
Yeah, it's definitely not a, I'm not sitting here saying that, getting a trapper in or, getting, myself in on your farm is going to double your deer numbers the first year.
Right.
Obviously, you have to put in the work on habitat management and providing that and deer management, turkey management. But that coupled with a predator management program, I mean, you do have a recipe for success, and most biologists will agree with that.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree.
Yeah.
So we get a lot of questions in terms of trapping. Some of the ones we've covered already, like how effective is it, how much damage do they actually do? We talked about that, but you have a lot of people that are kind of in the same boat as me. Like me, I find it very interesting.
Yeah.
I find it very intriguing. Yeah. I know little to none about it. I kind of know, like I said, when I did I knew, some about coyotes. And I did, some of the research, but as far as trapping goes, I've learned more. I know more now from listening to what you said today than I ever have. So like, I can tell you from one thing, as far as coming at it from like maybe someone who's interested in it that would like to maybe get started in it.
Yeah.
Like to me, it almost seems daunting. I'm like, man, where do I even start? Like how, I mean, I don't go out in the woods and go, that looks like where a coyote would be. I wouldn't know where to begin.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, as far as that, like how difficult is it, to kind of just, jump into it?
Yeah. Very good question. I would say that, in today's world with, obviously social media, YouTube, all the information out there that's basically at your fingertips, today is actually even an easier time to get into trapping than any time. Mm-hmm. Previously, especially looking in the 1800s, the 1900s, even into the, I would say 60s, 70s, and 80s, trapping was all but it was a really close knit, tight fraternity that did not talk about what they did. They would take on, an apprentice or someone who wanted to learn, and they poured that information into them. And sometimes you even had to ask that information from them. It wasn't freely given. And now with YouTube, for example, I have a couple of friends, buddies in Louisiana who noticed fawn predation on their lease in central Louisiana. They did reach out to me. I gave them a few pointers, shared some notes and stuff I had with them, but they primarily got started trapping just by looking at YouTube. They joined a couple of trapping forums but Facebook groups that talked about trapping all the time, or that were dedicated to trapping. And I think the first year those guys averaged over 30, close to 40 coyotes just Now, with that being said, that was exceptional. They had a high population of coyotes,
right.
But the information is there. I would say that, the number one thing that I would say would be, to kind of immerse yourself in it. Look on social media. There's a couple of groups out there in the Southeast and actually North America that are very popular with trappers. There's down south trappers out of Alabama. A couple of really good trappers, moderate that Facebook page. Trapping Talk, which is a national page. It's some really, really good information out there.
Right.
I would say that another step would be to, join your state national trapping associations. Those organizations are kind of the forefront. They protect our trapping rights because you can only imagine if our rights were taken away to trap, what would happen to not only our predator population, but what would then in turn happen to our deer and turkey
what would the
population.
effects be overall? There's no telling.
Right. And so, being very, very much involved, I know here in Mississippi, we have the Mississippi Trappers Association, very great organization. We even have demos of ways to set traps on our website. It's pretty neat, the information that's out there now. We've even expanded to even in the state, having Fair Bears Unlimited banquet. We have one coming up this fall. I mean, it's there. Our convention. We've actually now went from just trying to reach trappers to talk about obviously predator management, but reaching out to the general public, because it's become such a big issue with predator and wildlife management.
For sure.
Our convention is coming up this fall, and it's going to be interesting. Just the lineup that we have. So really immersing yourself. Maybe if you know a trapper, find a mentor. They'll more than likely be willing enough to share. I know one thing I'm proud of is, and a lot of people don't realize this, but some of I would consider the best coyote trappers in the United States are from our home state of Mississippi. Yep. And just find one of those trappers and follow them. You can pay for instruction now. You can there's a number of different things you can do to get started. Yeah. Another thing I wanted to mention is now since there has been such an interest in trapping or getting started in trapping, many of your trap supply houses are starting to offer beginners kits. Trapping starter kits, they call them, that have basically everything you need to start. Yeah. I had a good friend here in Madison who purchased one of those kits a couple of years ago, and he's been doing really well with coyotes.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So a lot of times when I see, and you can probably be, if anyone could dispel this, it'd be you. A lot of times when I see like a beginner kit like that, I wonder, I'm like, is it a bunch of gimmicky stuff in there? Is it stuff I'd actually use? Yeah. Because when I was doing some of that research, I saw some ads for that kind of stuff pop up, and I was like, I wonder if that's actually stuff I would need. Because again, I don't know.
Yeah. Obviously, you'd have to be, you'd have to be careful where you, where you purchased. You can tell who's a reputable, trap supply dealer or not. I will tell you that one thing about trappers is that we're trappers as a group. Where if we advertise something, most of the time if we put it together as a package, as a it's going to be somewhat they're going to be honest with you about it. These are the types of traps that you may need. This is a type of bait lure that can get you started, and then once you get that, that starter kit or whatever, and then you glean knowledge from a mentor or trapping groups or whatever, conventions, demos that you may attend. Right. You will start to learn, hey, instead of using this type of bait, I might should use this type of bait. Right. And you will kind of pick up and take from there.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense. Mm-hmm. My biggest takeaway from that though has been there's there's no it's not like the information's not out there, and it's not hard to find.
Yeah, it is there. I can tell you, I had a conversation with one of my friends from North Mississippi who's a really good coyote trapper a couple of weeks ago, and I just let him know that, hey, sometime this year let's get together and run each other's lines, because he can be doing something that I'm not doing that would make me a better trapper by just observing that.
Yeah.
And vice versa. He could come, run my line with me and say, well, Derek, why are you setting your trap there versus here? And I say, well, because I've observed the coyotes doing this, and that could be a takeaway for him.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting because you never stop learning.
Yeah.
And if you think you know it all, then you probably shouldn't be in it.
There's a lot of that translates over to like turkey hunting too.
Right. Yeah.
And so whenever I go, a lot of times I'll take, like me and Jordan went turkey hunting with Dave Owens this spring. Yeah. And we were like, I don't think I put a call in my mouth the other time. I was just watching. I was like, what's he doing? Yeah. Trying to learn,
Yeah. Yeah.
And then Dave, a guy like him, he even tell you, I learn every time I go out there. That's just how it works. I mean, it's nature. There's too many pieces and parts and dynamics to it to ever learn all of it. It's always something.
Yeah.
Always something.
I can say for new trappers, one thing that especially new coyote trappers is, do not get frustrated. I know and have heard of guys going 5, 6, 7 years without connecting with a coyote, and you have to put yourself in a mindset of you are trying to catch probably the hardest animal on earth to catch. Mm-hmm. And because you failed the first time or the second time, or even getting into years, don't give up. You're gonna find what works, and that's why I think I keep reiterating to master those basic sets.
Right.
And when you find something that works, stick with it.
Yeah.
And then you'll be successful.
Yeah, I definitely I get it, or I think I can see the allure to it, because I had a friend at Mississippi State when I was there. Mm-hmm. Got into trapping, started catching a few coyotes, and then he was gone. As far as like any of the hunting, fishing, any of that stuff, he's like, I'm gonna go run my trap line. Yeah. He was that's all he cared about anymore.
Yeah, I've gotten to where myself, even since high school when I first picked it up. Yeah, I went from hunting deer with a gun to hunting deer with a bow, to then I had started trapping, and then I noticed my even hunting deer with a bow has gotten less and less. And I still harvest a couple of deer a year, just for meat. Right. But my trapping has pretty much taken over my winter time now. Now spring is a different story. Yeah. Turkey season.
That's understandable.
Yeah. But yeah, it really. I hate to say that it consumes you, but it gets to a point that you enjoy it so much. Yeah. You just want to focus on beating that animal at his own game.
Yeah. So, understood, man. I understood. I get it, and I can't thank you enough for your time today. I think we hit everything we set out to talk about.
Yeah. Absolutely. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess we go ahead and wrap this up. Guys, as always, hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions about this or any other topics, feel free to send it in. And I think we're done. Derek, again, thank you. Thank you for your time. And as always, thank you for listening to Speak the Language podcast.